Welcome to Zero Trust Journey, where Zero Trust practitioners and leaders share unfiltered stories, leaving the marketing fluff behind. This is not another vendor pitch. It's a nonprofit community project, founded for the people navigating the real Zero Trust journey. The views expressed are personal opinions and do not represent any organization. This content is for educational use only.
Welcome, everyone, to another session of Zero Trust Journey podcast. Joining us today is Anupam Upadhyaya, SVP of Product Management at Palo Alto Networks. With over 2 decades in enterprise networking and security, he has led major innovations across Zero Trust, secure access, and AI-driven infrastructure. Anupam, recently, your thought leadership explores how modern architectures must continuously validate, trust, and secure every access point, not just once, but throughout the entire session and life cycle.
First of all, thank you, Victor. Excited to be here, and thank you for hosting me. I think what you said is right. Let's dive right in.
Excellent. So let's talk about Zero Trust strategy and evolution. Anupam, how has your view of Zero Trust evolved over the years, especially as identity, network, and application boundaries continue to blur?
Yeah. A lot of times, I'll start with something which is very obvious. A lot of time people talk about Zero Trust and least privilege access. And honestly, these are two very different frameworks. And let's talk about Zero Trust for a second. Victor, if you think about Zero Trust, what is it? It's a security framework that assumes no user, device, or network is trusted by default, even if inside the corporate perimeter or boundary. Like you said, every access must be verified, validated, and should be limited in scope. It builds on key principles like continuous identity and device verification, micro-segmentation, and honestly, it assumes breach is inevitable. It's going to happen, and everything that you're doing is actually to protect against that breach. Now, when you think about least privilege access, which is a different construct, Zero Trust is never trust, always verify. Least privilege access is only give users the minimum access needed to do their job. And I think if you ask about my thought evolution, right? I always started with, as a security guy, for Zero Trust. I'm not going to trust anyone. But if you start deploying that and putting that in practical perspective, it creates friction. There is friction between productivity and giving you tools that you need and security. So I think, can we start from a place where we enforce Zero Trust with least privilege access is something that has been that I've been thinking about, right? Especially in the age of human and non-human identities, especially in the age of perimeter-less users.
Sure.
I'm at office, you might be at home trying to access apps that are becoming perimeter-less, right? How do you provide Zero Trust while ensuring that people have access to tools that they need for their jobs? Becomes very important.
For sure. Anupam, let me ask you this. When organizations talk about starting with Zero Trust, you touched upon that a little bit. What mindset approach do you think, or actually, let me flip the question. What mindset approach do you think they often get wrong? So if I'm starting with Zero Trust, what do you think that people get wrong?
I think it's really that taking Zero Trust literally and saying, do not trust, always verify, starting with not trusting anything and building everything from the ground. I would say it's wrong. I would say it creates friction. And let me expand on that, because you're asking a very good question. So if you go back and think about users and app, what is unifying them? One is identity and context, right?
Because the devices they're using, that might connect them together with the application and identity, or the person who's using it.
Right. And Victor, think about AI, think about agents.
Yeah.
Think about non-human identities, right?
For sure.
So first thing becomes identity and context. Second is and that defines, who am I? Am I a user? Am I an agent? Am I a device? Am I an application? Am I a workload? Or am I a service account, like a service account for agentic AI, right? The second becomes control, right? Segmentation. How do I segment?
which is harder than said. I'm sure, Anupam, you have seen in the wild there. Microsegmentation, I think companies, enterprises, they try their best, but it's not really easy because at the end of the day, people need access between applications or networks or systems. So that start with maybe flat network, try to do microsegmentation, or start with very hardened microsegmentation, then maybe eventually started to get flattened. Have you seen those as well? I'm sure.
Correct, Victor. And I'll answer that in a second. I just want to make sure that we just talk about all the pillars: identity, segmentation. I would also say something that you and I talked about when we talked last time is proactive security, right? To move beyond reactive detection and response to a proactive approach. So if I go back to your original question, and then I'll address the segmentation part in a second. I think most places where people struggle more than getting it wrong is, what is the right identity posture? What's my segmentation and control mechanism? And what's my security posture, right? I think zero trust is really about getting these three things right. So can you have the right framework? So you start at a place where I'm giving Victor the tools that he needs to perform his job. And let's say Victor is a developer for this. And then I provide right zero trust principles on a continuous fashion, and do not believe Victor is Victor, and whatever app Victor is accessing is that app. I continuously verify that. And that requires these. Now, coming to segmentation, the question that you asked, multiple ways to do it, right? One is you could do VLANs, you could do you could do VRF, you could do firewalls.
You just took me 20 years back, just FYI. VLANs, VRFs, that's what I used to do 20 years ago. Yes.
Hey, I'm dating myself.
Yeah.
But think about it, right? Victor, some of these tools still exist.
Of course.
So really, if you go back, if you think about segmentation needs to tie back to the zero trust principle of providing the right access to the identity, human or non-human, to the right application. And it might not be just one tool set, Victor. You can't say that I'm going to solve everything in a cloud delivered security service. Or you cannot say I'm going to solve everything through a VLAN. It has to be a combination, and it has to keep in mind where you are with. Because the problem might be much easier when you are sitting at home, where you say, hey, look, everything that I need to trust and verify, I'm going to put it through a tunnel mechanism, through a client, take it to a security inspection. It might be very different, Victor, when you go to a branch setting where a lot of things might sit east-west, there are a lot of things might sit north-south, and a lot of users, you don't care about protecting the user, but more what they're trying to access, like guest users. So depends really on what the user profile is. You got to use all these tool sets.
Right. And I think, Anupam, one of the things that I've seen, especially with microsegmentation, where the scoping problem, right? We tend to have a scoping problem, especially when it comes to any sort of strategy, when it comes to zero trust or microsegmentation as a concept. Where do I apply and how much can I enforce it? So
100%.
Let me ask you this, from your experience, what's harder, deploying the right technology for zero trust or getting teams to adopt the necessary cultural changes? So when we're talking about technology, we're talking about all of this, but getting teams to adopt the required cultural changes and starting from the top and not the, let's say, geek language of zero trust, what's harder?
So I want to break your question into two.
Okay.
One is what's harder. But the second thing you said, which I think is very important, I want to double down a bit on that, provide some clarity. You talk about where do you apply security, right? And then we'll talk about culture in a second, right? How do you... I'll take an example to build on this, right? We'll go back to our favorite case, branch, right, Victor? We're sitting in a branch. So I'm going to take a step back. First, I'll tell you what I think, and then we'll try. I generally think that you need a centralized security and policy council. That's important to break barriers between different elements of the organization. You don't have a unified security console, you don't have unified visibility into the policy. If you can't make necessary corrections at one place, it creates friction, first of all, Victor.
And just to comment on that one, Anupam, I think companies have struggled with that. Enterprises, organizations have struggled with that, having that central policy decision center where policies are defined, enforced, and implemented. Because
100%.
everybody go when I have a view of policy, but then I have about 12 different consoles to configure, implement, and enforce. There is no harmonious way of that policy to work. So policy is Victor should log into this application between the working hours and he should perform his duties, and that's about it. So if you can have that policy at a central level, great. But if you have to do this on 12 different platforms, I think something is going to get messed and something is going to get slipped between the cracks, which goes against the zero trust.
I agree. It becomes super hard. And if you get to the crux of it, why are people looking for different policies? Like, let's get to that, right? So if we go to the philosophy, centralized policy, I still believe that security actions should be as close to the user as possible and might be distributed in nature. Like, for example, you require east-west security in a branch, right, Victor? You got IoT devices. You want to make sure they're not doing evil things on your network,
Yeah.
talk something else. You want east-west. You want to do that east-west in the branch, or do you want to take it to the cloud? We know the answer. You want to do it as close in the branch as possible. You want a different policy for that? No. You want centralized policy where it says, hey, if you see IoT security, if you see IoT devices, east-west, try to do the first level inspection in the branch. And if you require additional inspection, send that payload to the cloud. You want to have intelligent redirection. Or if you think about guest traffic, right, Victor? For guest traffic, I just want to do basic URL filtering. I don't care about what happens to the guest
Yeah,
device.
limit the containment, limit the blast circle we talk about, like contain that as much as possible so that the lateral movement, endpoint hopping, you reduce it to the minimum.
Exactly, 100%. So I think the friction that happens, Victor, if we get to the question is, people have tried to devise point solutions to go and address the branch problem, to solve the IoT problem, to solve the remote worker problem, to solve the private access problem, to solve the internet problem. And we'll talk about terms that we know. People start thinking about these projects, SWIG, Secure Web Gateway, CTNA, CASB, Shadow IT, or DLP, Data Loss Prevention, as separate projects. And then they start thinking about their own policies, and that's where the friction comes. And I think in this new world of agentic AI, where data gets distributed across multiple channels, people have adopted point solutions for that SWIG problem, the Z problem, the CASB problem, the DLP problem. And in this world, where these boundaries are getting blurred, Victor, right? Imagine you interacting with me, trying to find a clever response to an email and using a social tool, and we don't know the data that we're sending is that secure or not. So now data is going across all channels. Apps are all over the cloud. Users are all over the cloud. If you do not have a centralized policy console, if you do not have a centralized visibility console, if you do not have a place where you can do these, look at everything and fix everything, I think that is the biggest impediment, Victor, for zero trust adoption, because then it becomes super hard.
For sure.
If you get a job of starting integrating these technologies, instead of having the vendor integrate this, so you can actually focus on policies and reactions to security events,
Yeah.
you're just not set up.
Focus on business. So since you are AI guru and I want to talk about automation and ML as well with you. So the question again, with especially the rise of AI, it's a consistent question. I'm sure you get this all the time. Can automation /AI/ML truly replace human trust decisions in the security stack, or should they just support faster context analysis?
I think it's a great question. So let's start with what's the biggest issue with security? False positives, right, Victor? We haven't solved the false positives problem. I'll give you examples, right? A lot of customers are still very reluctant to use technologies like WAF, and they put it in monitor mode because they're saying, damn, if there's one false positive and I act on that, I'm blocking critical access. Or in DLP, a lot of people say in monitor mode. So I don't know what happens. Now, you haven't solved that false positive problem yet fully with humans. I think there is a great opportunity with AI ML to start automating a lot of this and reducing false positives. But it has to be based on that human learning feedback. You got to reinforce RHLF, right? Reinforce human learning feedback. You cannot just throw AI at the problem and throw data at the problem, which are great places to begin with. You got to be able to fine tune, train the model with human enforcement.
Sure.
Hey, this is where, and honestly, we're doing some of this. Every vendor is doing some of this. What happens is you talk about security. Let's talk about operations, right? Let's say something goes wrong in my network. Let's take a very simple example, right, Victor, which we all understand. Let's say we have a Wi-Fi problem, which honestly happened for a second in this call. What happens, Victor? What do? You go and toggle the Wi-Fi radio on your laptop and hope things.
Turn on and off.
Or you reboot your Mac, or you say that you reboot your router. Well, those are three things, right?
Yeah.
Well, honestly, if 3 or 4 times the process of toggling that radio button solves the Wi-Fi issue, why wouldn't you automate it? Because we have good confidence. This is the first one good step that can do it. Same thing for security, right? If it's security, we start building confidence that if I see such an event, it can help me solve that in a very deterministic fashion. Why not do it? But having said that, I think if we go back to the beginning of our conversation, right? I think AI brings a fantastic opportunity to help customers deploy security in the right way. You leverage the power of AI and the data available to start configuring the network, the user, the application the right way. So as you have less false positives. I think that's one thing that automation,
Right.
AI, and ML can bring right away. And then over time, you start fine-tuning based on AI
Makes sense.
with the right human feedback.
100%. 100%. Anupam, as we enter into the wrap of this episode, I have the question, which is, what security challenge do you think will define in the next 2-3 years? Pick up your 8-ball and look into it. Is it identity sprawl, a data exfil, shadow AI? What do you think is going to be next big challenge of security? Or is it still going to be same what we're dealing with today? Phishing, ransomware, deepfakes, all that.
Everything that you said, identity, data exfil, shadow, AI, you talked about ransomware. What is accelerating that, Victor? It's AI.
Yeah.
AI is also being used by the bad guys
Absolutely.
as much as by the good guys. I think what is going to, any good security vendor got to think about how the bad guys are using AI and be one step ahead of, and then for that you have to use AI. But getting more specific, one thing I think, and that's just a general answer, right? Look, AI will make these problems much more pronounced and much more immediate. Like the ransomware now happens in matters of minutes versus days, right? Because now you can use AI, ML, and automation to keep on attacking and getting the weakest point. I think the one part which is going to be very challenging is the rise of agentic AI. Is the rise of agents acting on our behalf to do jobs on our behalf. That is where identity, role-based, understanding the model, understanding the context, understanding the posture of the agent will be very, very important. And I think that's one area which every security company should focus on.
Excellent. And do you think with zero trust principles in 2-3 years, we have to start maybe adding a principle or modifying one of the existing ones to consider that factor? Because again, when the principles were created, AI was not a thing, not even close. Now, 16 years later, we have that part. So do you think we would have to add a principle, or it'll be, hey, zero trust principle strategy remains the same with the tactical approach to deal with AI and all?
The beauty of zero trust is very simple. Never trust, always verify.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay? Now, all that happened with this conversation is never trust AI, always verify
True.
AI generated actions. I would say it's an amendment rather than just veto.
Sure.
I think you got to start thinking about, like, remember, Victor, I'm sure when zero trust was invented, cloud was so nascent.
Yes.
Now cloud became,
Absolutely.
you start thinking about SaaS applications. You start thinking about SSPM and things like that. Workloads started happening. You start thinking about app security. So I think it's just the principle remains the same. I think we got to start thinking about these new vectors and how do we apply the zero trust principle to these new vectors of AI agents and so on.
Makes sense. Thank you so much for your time and your insights in zero trust. And
Victor, great chat, great conversation. Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on this Zero Trust journey. Now it's your turn. Step into the spotlight, share your story, and be part of the journey. Subscribe to Zero Trust Journey on LinkedIn for the latest news, events, and giveaways. Until next time.